dancing through the streets.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're having a fantastic day. If you're new to the channel, my name is Parker Nirenstein, and this is Vehicle Virgins. Today, we are doing something super exciting. It's also raining. What the heck, Southern California? The weather recently has been terrible. We are going to dyno the E63 AMG. For those who don't know what that means, we are going to use an instrument to determine the actual power that this car makes. Let's go ahead and pull her out of the garage. I love the douchey Mercedes emblem. Cold start. This car, oh. The new 2018 E63 is powered by a 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 that makes 603 horsepower and 627 pound-feet of torque, which is absolutely absurd for a daily drivable sedan. In fact, I've clocked this car from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds using a V-Box data logger. But nowadays, it seems for whatever reason, auto manufacturers are always underrating the car's power. So I'm curious, does this thing actually make more than 603 horsepower? Before we head out to VF Engineering to dyno this thing, let's head inside. I gotta talk to you about something. I've come back into the office to talk about watches. Watches are coming back in a big way, ladies and gentlemen, and a watch does more than just tell time. It makes a statement, and it also completes your outfit. At this point, if you don't have a watch, what are you even doing with your life? Because I openly express my love for watches, I get asked all the time, what watch should I get that's high quality and decently priced that won't break the bank? Well, I've got an answer for you, and it's the same one I've had time and time again, and that is Vincero. My boys over there produce super high quality watches that turn heads and it'll cost you less than $200. The manufacturing process is on par with watches that cost 5 times as much. If you're looking for a watch to elevate your game at a great price, then Vincero is the watch for you. They make gorgeous stuff, guys, and I don't have to just tell you that. You can look for yourself. And I encourage you to check out their website. There are some awesome pictures, all the different watches that they offer. Seriously, incredible stuff. And because you guys are subscribed to Vehicle Virgins, there is an exclusive link in the description that'll give you 15% off your entire purchase. So, if you need a watch, which you do, you freaking need a watch, click the link in the description below, but make sure to watch this video first. Let's roll. All right, time to head out. It'll be interesting to see what this thing is like in the rain. One thing to note is dynos, such as the one we are testing on today at VF Engineering. This is so weird, my car is driving itself right now. Measure horsepower at the wheels, not at the crank. So the 603 horsepower that Mercedes gives us, that's at the crank, at the engine. The horsepower number we are going to get today is at the wheels. So you have to use a conversion factor to approximate the drivetrain loss caused by the fact that the vehicle is an automatic and it's all-wheel drive. Now, a standard conversion factor is 20% drivetrain loss, so if we take that into account, the 603 horsepower at the crank becomes 482 horsepower at the wheels. I'm curious to see, however, because we have a rear-wheel drive mode, drift mode, if we put it in that, if we can actually change the horsepower readout. 15% drivetrain loss is pretty standard for rear-wheel drive cars. That would put us at 513 horsepower at the wheel. So leave a comment in the comment section below. What do you think the horsepower readout is going to be for this E63? I'm excited to find out.
Ooh, we live for the night. Ooh, here for the ride.
Right as I start pulling up to VF Engineering, the weather has magically cleared up. I am so excited to dyno this thing. All right, here we are. Out in VF Engineering in Anaheim. What? This was not here before. Well, it appears their neighbors are under serious construction. Let's go around the other way. Once again, I swear I didn't plan this, but Sam Hubinet's Huracan is here. I'm wondering if he is as well. Now, congrats to Nick, the owner of VF. He just picked up this C63S, which actually has an extremely similar engine as the E63 does. Same 4-liter twin turbocharged V8. This one has a little bit smaller turbos, making 503 horsepower instead of 603. I think he's gonna dyno this as well. Judging by the sign and the fans, I'd say they're probably about to do some dyno runs on something in there. All right, I'm not gonna lie, these two look sick together in matching satin grays. I love these things. At As a matter of fact, the C63 sedan is actually a big reason why I ended up with the E63. I reviewed one of these back in Michigan and was honestly blown away about how far Mercedes has come with their steering feel and handling. And then the exhaust note is just so far superior than the other German rivals. Let's go into VF and see what's up. Well, in typical VF awesome customer service, they're like, we can't just have your car on the dyno looking dirty. So they got the smart mobile detailer out here cleaning my car. This is actually the most satisfying thing in the world to watch. Oh, it's pretty cool. They've brought a van with its own portable water, washer, everything. They could literally do this in the desert if they wanted to. Holy crap, that's so beef. Look at that. There we go. Let's just leave it like that. Figured I'd take a closer look at the C63 while they're washing the E-Class. Honestly, I have always loved the way the C63 front ends look. In a way, I kind of like it more than the new E63. It's a bit more angular and a little less bulbous, so to speak. The front grills in the E63 are really, really big. This has got really clean lines. Really similar wheel design as well, although more spokes on the C63. Looks fantastic, and of course, Sam's gorgeous Huracan. I can't call it gorgeous, menacing, aggressive, insane, but it's also good looking at the same time. The E63 has been all cleaned up. Nick is taking it and putting it on the dyno. I did just realize something that would have been an absolute fatal, catastrophic error, and that is, with the drift mode, after about 70 miles an hour, the car actually goes back to all-wheel drive for additional stability. So if we had put it on a rear-wheel drive dyno, and at 70 miles an hour, it recouples the front drivetrain, the car would have shot itself into the wall. Yeah, that would be a nightmare. So we're not gonna do that. We're putting it on the all-wheel drive Mustang dyno, which hopefully we'll have Nick talk a little bit about how this works and see how much power it's gonna make. How's it going, Nick?
Great.
Good to see you.
Same here, Parker.
Congratulations on the new car, seriously. The C63 is sweet.
I love it. It's a great car.
So we are dynoing this today. The E63, 603 horsepower at the crank on, what is this, a Mustang dyno?
It's a Mustang MD500 all-wheel drive. It's a load-bearing dyno, and it's linked. So the front rollers are linked to the rear to simulate real road conditions.
That's awesome. Do you have any guesses on what this will make if it's 603 at the crank?
603 at the crank, depending on the drivetrain, will typically yield high 400s at all four wheels.
So guys, leave your guesses in the comments below, and that's what drivetrain loss is that?
It's in the high 20s, so close to 30% drivetrain loss.
Wow, that's a lot more than I was expecting.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see. Maybe it's underrated, maybe it's not. Could you explain a little bit about how a dyno works? I mean, from what I know, we've got these masses here that are going to measure the torque at the wheels, and then it uses an equation. It's like torque times RPM over 52 gives you horsepower. I may have looked that up beforehand.
Basically, to keep it simple, the dyno will measure the inertia on its retarder module to calculate using mathematical equations derived from the numbers on this particular car. So we input what model it is.
Gotcha.
The software has pre-calibrated weights and various other factors integrated into it.
Wow.
And so it'll compare and look up the results it collects from the rollers with the four-wheel drive system, with the car rolling all the wheels. All the tires will actually provide a calculation, some numbers into the computer, and it puts out basically a horsepower and torque number.
Awesome. And then if you were to, I don't know if you do this or not, approximate what it was at the crank, like we wanted to compare whether Mercedes was 100% accurate with the 603, how would you take the number that we're going to get at the wheels and extrapolate it?
That's a really good question. So dyno numbers measured at the wheels are often compared to what manufacturers advertise at the flywheel, and that's a big challenge because typically the car manufacturers will estimate power based on having the engine out of the car on an engine dyno, so they will give you flywheel horsepower figures. However, we're measuring the power of the engine once it's traveled and transmitted through the drivetrain system and through the differential and eventually through onto the tires of the rollers of the dyno. So in some ways it may not be fair or accurate to backward calculate what we now measure the car's power at the flywheel, and we prefer to just compare power measured at the wheels.
Sure.
There are a number of factors, and the main factor is that in this particular environment we're not simulating complete conditions such as cooling. So when we redline the car in the dyno, the car may do 120 miles an hour, but we're not giving it 120 miles an hour of air speed and cooling. So the horsepower numbers also have to take that into account as well.
Sure. And then, yeah, you use this as a baseline at the wheels to, if you tune it, then it's going to be a perfect comparison between before and after.
So this gives us a scientific comparison, assuming we set the fans up in the same way, roughly, you know, the atmospheric temperature is very close to the original testing. We'll do baseline testing and then post-modification testing. That gives you a nice delta to compare, regardless of what the car makes at the flywheel.
Perfect. All right, let's make this 1,000 horsepower.
Okay.
The Mustang dyno is actually the most dangerous of all the dynos. Just kidding. As Nick was saying, one of the challenges of dynos is simulating accurate airflow. Obviously, if this car is traveling at 120 miles an hour on the road, there's going to be a ridiculous amount of air against the radiators and into the engine. But there was a shop that I went to when I got the wheels installed. Now, these are extraordinarily expensive, on the upwards of $250,000 to $500,000, but they have these rooms that actually have a pretty accurate simulation of the airflow depending upon speeds. So how much setup is required for running a car on a dyno?
It just takes a few minutes, usually customer information,
Cool.
make and model of the vehicle, and just select which mode to run the car in, 2 or 4-wheel drive.
That's cool to watch. Getting the E63 strapped down to the dyno. Come around back here. See, the real secret here is we've added 4 large turbochargers to the front of the vehicle. It's gonna give it some extra power. Well, we've got the car almost entirely set up on the dyno, and I wanted to ask you, so there's basically 2 main companies, right? There's the Mustang dyno and then Dyno'D, and then this is a Dyno'D right here.
Correct. This is a Dyno'D 224.
Okay.
It's a single roller, and it's designed to run basically freewheel, so there's no load on the engine. It does come with an optional load bearing module. We didn't choose that, as it's typically used for putting a load on the car. However, the Mustang dyno has a load bearing module, which is an eddy current module. It's an electromagnetic retarder and puts load on the axle of the dyno rollers. So the key difference is load and no load. Dynos with no load will typically enable the car to put out more power because they'll see a lower load calculation in the software in the ECU, and the ignition timing will ramp by itself upwards and enable the engine to make more power. When the vehicle experiences a greater load, such as on the Mustang dyno, the engine will put out less power. It'll actually experience a higher load and therefore run lower ignition timing, therefore putting out lower numbers. It's also a 4-wheel drive, so the power is being transmitted through 4 different wheels, and you'll actually see a lower number because of the losses through 2 different transmissions.
And which do you think is more accurate? Can you say in general whether this is a lower number, but is it a more accurate number versus there's no load on the Dyno'D?
Yes, so the Mustang dyno, which puts a load on the car, will typically create or put out numbers which are closer to what the car is putting out on the road. And one way to check that is to actually run the car on the road in 4th gear, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, and log the ignition timing. Then put the car on the dyno and run it again with a load setting that mimics the same ignition timing as it did on the street. And that way you'll actually replicate as close as possible power numbers as the car is actually putting on the street. I
had heard the figures like 15% drivetrain loss approximation for rear wheel drive and 20 for all wheel drive. Is it possible that that's on a Dyno'D, and this one, because it's reading lower, you were saying, I've never heard the 28 to 30% losses before.
Right, so typically on a 4-wheel drive dyno with load, you can see up to 30% drivetrain losses, but on a 2-wheel drive dyno with load, you may see as little as 20%. But a two-wheel drive dyno with no load, you may only see 12 to 15% drive.
Gotcha. All right, I'm excited to see what happens. We've got all the fans running now. It is finally time to do some pulls in the E63. Is about to be so loud. E63S full throttle acceleration inside. Oh my god, that is loud. So we just tried to pull in 6th gear. Nick determined there was a little bit too much load on the car for 6th gear to be effective. So we're gonna run that back after it cools down for a bit in 5th and see what she does. Well, we've done a few pulls and the numbers are in. Nick, can you go over what our findings are on the E63?
Yes, after like 4 or 5 pulls, we were able to determine which gear the car was able to complete a run in based on the cooling capacity of our fans. We ran the 9-speed car in 4th gear, so it would complete a full pull to 7,000 RPM.
Gotcha.
On the 4-wheel drive, you see the numbers here on the screen. The higher curve is the torque. So it makes peak torque at approximately 3,460 RPM with an output of approximately 560 to 570 pounds of torque at all 4 wheels, which we equate to approximately in the high 600, so close to 690 pounds of torque. The horsepower curve is the curve just beneath it. You'll actually see 2 little inflections here, which appear to be a kind of a characteristic of how the car is running on this dyno. I completed several tests. I ran the car after extensive cooling, so cool down didn't affect that. I did log the data while the car was being driven on the dyno, and we'll analyze that to see how it performs on paper. But it was doing that in a reproducible manner. However, we'll ignore that for the time being. You don't feel that on the street. It could be cooling or it could be a load based characteristic just on the dyno. Okay, getting back to the results, we'll see actually that the peak horsepower is close to the 5,000 RPM range here, and it was actually 504 horsepower at all 4 wheels, which we equate to around about 640 horsepower.
Wow, that's pretty solid.
Very strong car, ran very smoothly through all the RPM apart from that minor hiccup there we see. But as we do more and more of these, we'll see more and more traits related to these cars.
So as he was saying, obviously it's impossible to perfectly estimate the drivetrain losses, but if we take 20% for instance with that 504, that gives us 630, so close to that 640 he was saying. And if you do the 28% drivetrain losses, that gives you close to 700. So somewhere in that 630 to 700 horsepower range, so definitely a little bit underrated.
Depends on the temperatures and the fuel. Obviously inside a dyno, inside a room, a facility like this, breathing is extremely important for the car. So if we don't have enough inlet or enough air coming into the building, there's not enough oxygen for the car to breathe because this engine is consuming a vast amount of air. And so it's really vital to get this car into a cell.
Sure.
Where you have a huge amount of air traveling through the system to feed it with fresh oxygen supply.
And so if this makes 504 at the wheels now, what do you think realistically, if you tuned it, what we could get it to?
I estimate from what we've already been doing on AMGs that we'll make an additional 100 horsepower at the wheels and 120 pounds of torque at the wheels.
So over 600 horsepower at the wheels.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
You have to watch it with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It was
Bob.
fantastic seeing what this beast can put down. Once again, VF Engineering always kills it, always super hospitable. It'll be interesting to see if we tune this bad boy, what it can really make. Those are some pretty strong numbers. 504 horsepower to all four wheels and 567 pound-feet of torque at the wheels as well. Using those drivetrain conversions at 20% drivetrain loss, like we were saying, that's 630 horsepower at the crank. Using 28% drivetrain loss, that is 700 horsepower at the crank. Remember, Mercedes numbers is an underrated 603. And then the torque figures are well over 700 pound-feet of torque at the crank. That is awesome. Some less impressive numbers, I've been averaging 12.9 miles per gallon. Lovely. Literally couldn't care less though. Now we've got a soothing 2.5 hour drive back home in rainy traffic. Is this a drag strip? It's a drag strip! Go red, go red. All right, green light, green light. Hey, wait, green light. There we go, vroom. Yep, it's a little wet. I literally just saw like 20 police cars in a row just rip down the freeway. I wonder if we're just witnessing a high-speed chase right now. Holy crap. This drive has been unbelievable. When I started out, the map said it was gonna take 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm like 3 hours into this drive and we're still not there yet. But the E63 is comfortable. I'm really stoked on these sports seats. I thought after a drive that's this long, they'd be uncomfortable, but honestly, it's doing pretty good. I'm averaging now, I reset the trip computer about halfway through, 18.5 miles per gallon. That's pretty decent actually, considering I've been a combination of bumper to bumper and some freeway speeds the entire way.
I can see it all, and I don't come
Well, Google Maps says my ETA is 30 days from now, so I'm so done with this drive. After my week-and-a-half long commute, well, it felt like that anyways, I am finally back home. Honestly, so impressed with the way the E63S did today. Comment down below, what do you think? Is that more or less power? I know you've already guessed than you were expecting. It's kind of exactly what I was imagining. Now, does the E63 need more power? Absolutely not, but do cars need 600 horsepower? Absolutely not as well. So we definitely are gonna need to crank the power up a little bit on this thing. Some awesome videos coming your way. If you haven't joined the family yet, smash that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. I look forward to seeing you guys next video.